Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us here. My name is Joshua Tokayon, and I'm the Executive Assistant of Lawrence Leung and the Lead Supervisor of Webinar as well. So if you have any suggestion for topics, you can email it to me or to our support so we can include your suggestions in our list. So our topic for today is strategies to maximize passive income. This topic is perfect for you, especially if you already own a rental property. We look for the best person to discuss this, and despite of his busy schedule, he gave us time to share his knowledge with us today. So without further ado, let's all welcome our guest speaker, the chairman and CEO of Cortland Financial Group, Mr. Michael Cruz.
Thank you, Joshua, and thank you for having me today. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here to present this information to all of you joining us. Thank you very much for making time for your busy schedules. I'm excited about the information we're about to share, and we've got a lot of information to share. I am going to be moving at a nice clip, assuming to a certain degree that you guys are experienced real estate investors, but my job here is to help you further along that process. So I'm not going to assume too much. I am going to get somewhat granular where it's probably of, I think, the utmost importance that you understand some of the essentials and the principles of what we're sharing today. We are going to be introducing what might be new concepts. So we've taken a high level approach, but we will have time at the end of the presentation to get granular. I do encourage you to stay for the question and answer session because the question and answer session is, I think, a really important part of the learning experience. And that's where you get an opportunity to see and hear information and then learn how it might apply to your individual circumstances. So the Q&A is very important. You also will get to hear other questions that others ask. So please, if you can, and if time permits, please stay for the Q&A. Kat, why don't you go ahead and switch to the next slide, and as you control the slides, we'll just say next here. So this particular topic is both learning about passive real estate investing and how you can generate a passive income stream, yet really benefiting from all that real estate has to offer. So it's not just passive income, it's passive income relative to real estate. And I believe that some of you joining us today might have rental properties or investment real estate or income producing real estate assets. So part of today's discussion is how to sell your real estate without paying taxes. So how to essentially defer, reduce, or eliminate taxes on the sale of highly appreciated investment property with a DST 1031 exchange. Now, yes, this benefits greatly existing investors and that own rental properties, but it is also important to note that what we're going to share with you today for the right individuals can also make sense as a cash investment. So this presentation today really is not just passive real estate investing. It's how to sell real estate without paying taxes. We're going to highlight essentials on 1031 exchanges. But the focal point of today's presentation is the DST, or the Delaware Statutory Trust, as passive real estate investment. So turn to the next slide here. Before we begin, just on a high level, just a few disclosures that are important. We prepared this information for KEOP and for the customers of the KEOP group, and the information is intended to provide general tax information, and it's really good information, but unfortunately, it may not apply to everyone. So it's important that you speak with your tax professional or legal professional before acting on any information presented today. There's access to third-party resources, which is also very good, but it may not be relevant or really appropriate for your circumstances. Again, so just make sure that you do verify the information. Next slide, Kat. There is no offering of securities today. This is purely an educational presentation. We're not asking you to invest. We're not asking you to take any particular action that would cost you anything. This is purely an educational presentation. Some of the properties and the companies that we'll be introducing to you today, again, they're not available for investment. This is purely educational. We really think it's important to get to know our customers and really assist them through a methodical process of determining suitability, knowing what their needs and objectives are, and then and only then making suitable recommendations once we get to know you. Also, we'll be talking about some track records and objectives, and so keep in mind that that's past performance. There's no guarantee of future performance, so that we'll keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. Next slide. The best way to really introduce myself is to not just share some information about myself. I think it can get pretty boring, if I just rattle off, accomplishments or where I've been. But it's more importantly, I think, and you'll get to know me and my background by really hearing about this journey that I've been on that started 30 years ago. And for me in particular, it was an exciting journey because 30 years ago, I got introduced to passive real estate investing, and it really changed the course of my career as it really made me aware of some really unique opportunities and some really unique opportunities to help investors that even today, aren't really widely known, even after 30 years. And I embarked on what's been a great 30-year career. And I guess to start the journey, I will share with you that my background really begins in the big, not New York Stock Exchange wirehouses at a firm named A.G. Edwards that doesn't exist anymore because they've been all absorbed by the banks over the last 30 years. You probably have seen that. But I was doing at the time I started in the industry, I was a stock analyst and I became a stockbroker. And through the evolution of the securities industry, we all morphed and or evolved into financial planners. And in that process, we began sharing a diversified pool of investments, not just stocks, but mutual funds and ETFs now, and annuities and all sorts of investments. The traditional stockbroker doesn't really exist today. Today, the stockbroker is, either a money manager or a financial advisor, a financial planner, a consultant. But I had a really unique experience because at a seminar, which was at the time what I would do to gain and attract new customers, is that I would go out and every month, 4 or 8 times a month, I would do seminars all around town and help people understand their investment options. And at one particular seminar, which is what you hope for at the very end, which is to be approached by people who are interested and set an appointment. And sure enough, at the end of the presentation, one gentleman came to me to set an appointment, which was really the first step in a real dramatic change in my career, and that's a gentleman by the name, we'll call him Richard Glenn. And Richard came to the podium where I was speaking and said, Mike, I really enjoyed your information. I like to set a meeting with my mom, because my mom needs assistance with financial planning. And so we set the meeting, and I walked into the conference room that day, and there was just a darling 80-year-old lady, dressed very, very well, with the prettiest smile. She just had a permanent smile on her face. And to this day, I never forget her, and we'll call her Sally Glenn. And in my meeting with Sally Glenn was really the first step that I really started to embark on this incredible 30-year journey of helping investors, retire through the use of passive real estate investments. And what I had learned in the process, that there were two people I was actually doing financial planning for. It wasn't, Sally, but Richard was getting ready to retire, and he knew that his mom who was not too interested in investments, and she had taken a passive approach to real estate investing, and I'll describe it because it's an interesting passive approach to real estate. But it was really Richard's desire to help his mother improve her real estate holdings because he knew that, at 80 years of age, she had no interest. She was an artist, and she had a wonderful portfolio. And Richard knew that at some point in time, he would be the beneficiary of the portfolio. So he wanted to make sure his mom was doing well. And we sat there, and they hand me a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper was a list of real estate assets. Now, keeping in mind that at the time, I didn't own a real estate company, I wasn't a real estate broker or an agent. In fact, most traditional financial advisors know very little about real estate. If you ask them about real estate, they'll typically tell you that it's something that you sell and you buy stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and annuities. And that was at the time really all I really knew. And we knew it well. We knew those, assets and financial planning well, but we didn't know real estate. And then as I look at this piece of paper, it was a piece of paper that was not typically what I receive at a, financial planning meeting, which is brokerage statements and annuity statements or retirement plan statements. It was a list of assets. And on there, it was nothing but real estate. So I asked, do you have these other statements? And they said, no, this is everything my mom owns. There is a checking account with a lot of money and a few CDs, but this is basically it. And in there was a duplex, a fourplex, a condo, and I was in Orange County at the time. And there's one in particular that I'm going to share with you. And there was a 7-Eleven anchored grocery, a 7-Eleven anchored retail center with it was mixed use, so kind of a little office and mostly retail. And what was interesting is that I looked at it and I said to myself, okay, so um, I didn't know what to do. And I just stopped and I said, okay, well, typically what we do, and this is something that happens in the financial planning industry, is that we usually network and we usually have others that we consult with. And at that point, because I absolutely had no idea what to do with these real estate assets, because the first response was sell them and go buy mutual funds. But because I wasn't exactly sure what to do with those assets, I concluded the meeting. I asked for them to return. I was going to, you know, work with the tax and legal department to better understand the assets, see if we within our network had real estate professionals that we could work with. So, the first thing that I did in a conversation after that meeting was learn that if I wanted to sell her assets, she would probably lose at that time, taxes were very high, almost 50% of her equity. And being a financial advisor, that's not the way you start a relationship. You don't start a relationship by giving them half of what they had before they met you and then reinvesting 50% less and then hoping to achieve their goals. And so the tax department said, you know, it does not make sense, for you to, sell this property because it would incur substantial taxes. Now, what was interesting in the process is that as I met with them the second time and we discussed the real estate and the taxes that would be incurred had she sold the property, is that I realized that there were a lot of things going on. You see, Sally had inherited that property about 30 years ago. And being that she was an artist, she had no interest in raising rents. And she learned passive income very quickly. And that was if you never raise rents, nothing breaks down, no one complains, and you could almost have a management free real estate portfolio by keeping rents, substantially below market. In fact, I'll share the story about the 7-Eleven now. And what happened was she had an accounting or a CPA tax preparation office at the property near the 7-Eleven on the same property. And that tax professional was a very nice gentleman that would collect her rents and make sure that the property was cared for because she had no interest. All she wanted to do was collect rents and deposit them and spend the money. Or in her case, she would just spend it on frames for all the art that she would produce and sell in Laguna Beach. But what we learned, which was absolutely amazing, was that the CPA had reported to her that the 99-cent store, which was kind of next to the 7-Eleven, had been wanting to expand for a long time when another retail store next door had become vacant. And many months and almost a year had passed, and Sally had no interest or no knowledge in executing a lease. She had no desire. She really didn't want the extra money or need it. Again, we were primarily there because of Richard's interest in, and his needs as he was planning his retirement. So he wanted to do more for his mom. And what we discovered in that meeting was that Sally told us that one day she was sitting there opening her mail, and she looked at the rent, and she noticed that the rent from the 99-cent store was more than it usually was. So she thought, let me call the tax professional that helps me manage this property. And she calls him and she says, "Hey, I noticed that the check for the 99-cent store was more than it usually is." And he says, "Yeah, Sally, I've been telling you for almost a year now that they wanted to expand." So the 99-cent store took it upon themselves to blow a hole through the wall to the vacant space and actually just moved in, changed the locks, and then just gave Sally what they felt was market rent. And that was one story that I've always liked to share with people as the wrong way to passively invest in real estate, and that's in keeping your rents extremely low and ignoring your tenants. And to her benefit, they were nice enough to increase the rents, and she chuckled and smiled. Never sent the revised lease, but that was Sally's story. Sally was a passive investor, had no interest in real estate. And there were some other things going on that they didn't even realize, and that was that after 30 years, she had no depreciation remaining, but in those 30 years, her real estate had highly appreciated. So she had an enormous amount of dormant equity in that real estate that wasn't producing any income. Because she didn't have any depreciation, she was paying taxes on all that income. And what we learned as we continued through the relationship is that if we sold the property, we would pay high capital gains upon sale. And at that point, neither of us had any knowledge that Section 1031 or a DST could be a solution for real estate investors quite like Sally. Let's move on to the next slide. And when we sat there, I explained to her that, there are very, very good reasons to sell. So we talked about the importance of how to continue her success and how this could help Richard and how we could change the assets and the strategy to better suit her. And we had discovered that there was a way that we could preserve 100% of her proceeds. Of course, there would be selling expenses when she sold her real estate, but that she could sell her assets and preserve 100% of her proceeds and reinvest through a Section 1031 into a product. At the time, it wasn't called the DST, but it was similar to the DST. Today, it's called the Delaware Statutory or DST, that she could invest in and gain all the benefits. And if we move into the next slide, I want to highlight this particular slide here because for many real estate investors that have owned highly appreciated real estate, this is what we faced 30 years ago when investors saw that it would make absolutely no sense to sell your real estate and then invest half of your money. So this process with Sally really was an eye opener, as I realized that there were many investors like Sally that exist that would really love to avoid all of these taxes, and they're especially high in California, among the highest in the country. There are several other states that are pretty much on equal footing throughout the country, but it would be devastating to sell and have, half of your money to invest for income and growth. So if you turn to the next slide, what we found is that there was a process, and that process really broke broke it down for us. And in working with the tax department at the brokerage firm that I was with at the time, we realized that investors could benefit greatly by using a 1031 exchange. So we embarked on developing this exchange analysis, and Kat, if you move to the next slide, what we do here, and this is a tool that I'd like everyone to know, um, that Lawrence and his team over at KeyUp have access to, because we develop these tools for analytics to really help you quantify. And if you really look at the yellow highlighted area without going in through, through every detail here, really what this aims to illustrate is, the power of tax deferral. And I should add that if any of this information is of value to you and you'd like to receive it, Keyup has a copy of this that they can make available to. But what this aims to illustrate is over a 10-year period, the substantial tax savings and the growth on those tax savings compounded over a period of time really goes a lot further than cashing out and investing less. Now, of course, there are good reasons why you might want to cash out and sell out of real estate. You might have, estate needs, liquidity needs, and those might, override or be of greater benefit to the individual. But in this process of comparing, taxable versus tax deferred, we realize that Sally could be better served with passive real estate that was professionally managed for her. So let's go over to the next slide and see what we have there. So what we're about to introduce to you is what I really consider to be, the last great tax shelter available to Americans, especially to investors that own income property that are ready to trade, because it allows us to reinstate what we call total return. And real estate is a unique investment, and it's often forgotten what total return means. So, in the simplest form, you buy stocks, they go up. Maybe you get dividends. You buy bonds, they're interest-bearing securities. Maybe they appreciate in value, but mostly interest, right? Stocks appreciation. But what's interesting about real estate is that where other investments leave off in terms of providing return potential, real estate really is unique in that you get an opportunity to do far more. For example, if it's properly structured through a 1031 exchange, or when you first buy real estate, in fact, oftentimes investors forget that the longer they hold their real estate, the more that the benefits are diminished over time. So like depreciation eventually runs out. Depreciation is exciting when you first have it in the beginning because it shelters all your rental income from taxes. It's a phantom loss on your Schedule E. And how wonderful is that? Your rents are completely sheltered from taxes because you have the depreciation to offset it. But total return includes the income, the growth potential. And then when you add additional layers like leverage to increase, your investment base, when your tenants are paying down your principal and reducing your debt and building your equity through both principal reduction and equity appreciation, it gets really, really exciting because you really get to do a great deal more than you could with other investments. And that's why sometimes just on the taxable equivalent yield basis, and I'll share a real fancy term with you. Some of the wealthiest investors or the highest income earners in the U.S. buy municipal bonds. And the reason that they buy municipal bonds is because if you buy them in the state that you reside in, they can be free from both federal and state taxation. So one way to better understand it is to say, if a municipal bond is paying 5%, and it's double tax free and you're in the 50% tax bracket, how much are you really making on a taxable equivalent basis? Well, you're making 10%, right? 10% less 50%, you keep 5%, right? Because it's not what you make, but what you keep. So when investors look at municipal bonds and they're comparing yields, a 5% municipal bond to someone in the 50% tax bracket would have to yield 10% just to be equal to and then, of course, 10% investments can also, include a higher level of risk. So that's why the highest income earners invest in municipal bonds just for income. And real estate is very much like, investing in a municipal bond from an income standpoint, because if you have depreciation and you shelter that depreciation, Your income on a real estate investment, if it's properly structured, could also be sheltered from both federal and state taxation. But if you remember, real estate is a total return investment. So not only do you get potentially double-digit returns from an income standpoint only, but then you also get the benefit of appreciation, principal reduction, right? And then, of course, 1031 exchange, because when you do sell other securities, they don't, you can't do a 1031 exchange with them. So let's move on to this next slide, because I think that, hopefully by now, you've seen the journey that I've been on in trying to help an investor like Sally Glenn, who had run out of depreciation. Her rents were terribly below market and not producing the income on her equity that she deserved and that she could have, but didn't know how. And what I'd like to do is move to the 1031 DST alternative as the solution for investors that might seem like Sally, might have needs like Sally, or maybe would love to invest cash as passive real estate investments to get all of the total return benefits that real estate offers. So let's move to the next slide. And in the next slide, what we have here is a picture of an apartment building, and Kat's going to click on this link here. And what she's going to show you is a video, because I think we should begin with the end in mind. And if you're familiar with Dr. Stephen Covey, the author of the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, begin with the end in mind as one of those 7 habits. So let's start with one of those habits and take a look at what a DST looks like, so that you can get a tangible sense of what investing in passive real estate would look like. And you'll have to put the volume on, Kat, if you can.
In a community that features 600 acres of housing and public space, 150 which is dedicated to public parks, schools, and other recreational amenities, it's really easy to imagine what a day could be like when you walk out your front door. Residents have access to virtually everything they could want, including coffee shops. After going to the coffee shop, I'd imagine they'd come back and get in a quick sweat at the gym, which is open 24 hours a day, and then I would probably start my workday. Whether that be at Lyric and Norton Commons or just downtown, or maybe working from home, there's many options for residents in terms of working. We were drawn to Louisville for a few different reasons. One, we're really interested in the diversified employment base, the mix of white collar and blue collar jobs. We're also attracted to the relative affordability, especially given its proximity to other major metros. And so on a relative basis, we thought that Louisville offered a high quality of life, but for a lower cost of living. As we looked to enter the market, we were trying to find a community where we felt like there was a unique niche within the broader market. And finally, after years and years of looking, we had the opportunity to acquire Lyric at Norton Commons. Norton Commons is a very special place. You can see it from the architecture. There's a master town architect who makes sure everything is cohesive and looks good together. While there's a mix of uses, mix of housing levels, everything is cohesive and looks like it was built at one period of time with a distinct architectural style. It certainly checks all the boxes for that high-income earner that we were looking to target. There really isn't an amenity that Lyric and Norton Commons doesn't have. If it's not here, it's probably not needed. There's a 24/7 gym, a coffee bar, a generous club room. The lobby and foyer into the property is really an amenity in and of itself. There's multiple courtyards spread throughout the property. There's also a demonstration kitchen, which features china. So you could have a big party and have a chef come in, demonstrate what they're cooking. So it really offers every single amenity you possibly could want. Access to a business center, access to a relaxation pod if you need to chill out for a little bit. There really was no stone left unturned. And I think the biggest amenity that this property has is the retail that's right downstairs.
Thank you, Kat. Let's move into the DST now. Now that you've got a real glimpse of what a Class A multifamily looks like, and I think it's important that we now get a little more granular about. Let's see here. Can you see the slides there? Are you displaying the slides yet, Kat? Oh, there we go. Thank you so much. So what we have now is a little bit of a deeper dive into the DST, and it won't take too long to get through this. But go ahead and turn to the next slide. And if one slide could say it all, it's this next slide. If you're a current property owner that owns a nice fourplex, 10-unit apartment building, and you're looking to retire, this is what a DST exchange looks like. Let's turn to the next slide. If you're not familiar with a 1031 exchange, this is a high level overview of what a 1031 exchange is all about. And it's actually not as complicated as many people think them to be. Essentially, you as a seller decide that you would like to list and sell your property with Kia, and that it would make sense to either trade up into larger units because the benefits that I've shared with you today don't only apply to a DST, can just simply apply to whether you wanted to go from 4 to 40 units. Dormant equity being unleashed, and depreciation gained is done through the 1031 process. It's any time that you exchange real estate. So ultimately, the goal for the investors are the same, right? You want to get more income, more tax shelter, and that could be accomplished through a 1031. You would sell the property. One important part of the 1031 exchange is the accommodator, where the proceeds are sent to directly from escrow. And the accommodator is simply holding the funds until you're ready to close on your DST or direct real estate portfolio. And then you get to benefit from all the income and growth potential and total return that real estate has to offer. That's a high level process of a 1031 exchange. I can get granular if you like at the end of the presentation. So let's move into the Delaware Statutory Trust, which is the next slide. And you could actually move 2 slides over. So basically, the Delaware Statutory Trust is really, for Sally, was a turnkey solution, because she just simply she had a desire to own investment property. She saw how good it's been to her, but she just didn't have the time, the interest, or the desire to find and manage one. And that's where the Delaware Statutory Trust comes in. They say that necessity is the mother of all invention, and I'm proud to be part of that founding group in the early 1990s that recognized that there was a need for this type of passive direct real estate investing. And so these products were born. And today we have a Delaware Statutory Trust, and it's a business trust which was created under the state, under the Delaware law. And it's a separate legal entity that the IRS recognized as qualified replacement property for real property, or like kind for IRS 1031 exchange purposes. So the investors are in a DST or part of the trust. They're not direct owners. They hold a beneficial interest. Could be similar if you and your family members were tenants in common. If you've ever owned real estate with friends, family, or colleagues, and you're all on title to a particular property, you would all be on title to the trust, and the trust would own the property. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and let's meet some of the DST sponsors, because I think it is important to look. Just now that you see what these properties look like, let's look at some of the companies and some of the leaders in the DST space, because I think it is important to know the size and these experiences. So if you went to the next slide, Kat, you'll see that these companies are substantial in size. We're talking about companies north of $1 billion, some north of $10 billion, with very long established track records dating back to 1975, with billions of dollars in projects, DSTs that have gone full cycle with very competitive returns, as you can see. And these are all net of expenses. So as you can see, and this is also tax deferred returns too, for those investors that have decided to continue doing 1031 exchanges in the future. So you can see we have not only competitive returns, these are tax deferred returns, and their companies that have done a pretty good job over decades for their investors in the DST space. Let's take a look at the managers, the actual on-site property managers that manage DSTs. The next slide, you'll see we just listed two here because we specialize in multifamily. Even though that the DSTs, you can buy DSTs that are, triple net, they are, commercial, retail. We favor multifamily. These are our two multifamily specialists. Now, these companies are among the biggest in the world, 23,000 employees, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of units under management. So these are the kind of property managers that manage these large institutional properties, keeping in mind that these are 300 to 600 units in many cases. And the fees, when you have those economies of scale, Greystar, many of our properties just charges 2.25%. Now, you can't get that deal if you own a 4-unit apartment building. They won't manage a 4-unit apartment building, but if you own a 300 or 400 unit apartment building, you get the 2.25%, 2.5% deal, and that's pretty darn good on this institutional level. And these are the kind of companies that manage properties for the insurance industry, banks, and other large institutions like publicly traded REITs. Let's move on to the next list here. And we can go through these pretty quickly because these are just pictures, Cat, of some of the types of multifamily assets that we buy. As you can see that, for apartments, this is the absolute best that your money can buy. But in this particular slide here, what we illustrate is really some additional value that the DST provides, and that's the diversification. Because from the single sale of a duplex or a fourplex, we're able to buy 2, 3, 4, 5 DSTs for diversification in different geographic locations, different property managers, different asset managers. And if you'd like the diversification of different asset classes, like as is illustrated here, you can diversify among different asset classes, even though that we do favor multifamily over some of these others. And if we move to the next slide, these will go through relatively quickly because it's just, a bit repetitive in the sense that we're just reinstating some of the obvious, in that you don't have to manage these. You get to stay in the real estate game. It's passive, it's institutional, it's diversified, and in every case, the financing is fixed, and it's also non-recourse. So unlike things that you would probably acquire on your own, the DST sponsor and the trust is the guarantor on these transactions. And so the risk, of course, is limited to the investment, but not the investment and the additional mortgage associated with these transactions. If you move to the next slide, some of the benefits continue in that again, this is just repetitive, is that we reinstate the total return benefits through the DST. And some of the things we didn't talk about or highlight, but might have been obvious, is that it's a great wealth transfer tool or estate planning tool, in that in Richard's case, Richard is sort of a real case. He got to inherit these assets, upon his mom's passing, and he loved, the fact that they paid monthly. It was relatively stable income, and he got to enjoy all the benefits. In the process, something that is also, from an estate planning standpoint, that's often overlooked, is the step up in basis. And there's a term in the industry called swap till you drop. And swap till you drop basically means that you keep trading up until the passing of the first spouse. And then the surviving spouse gets a complete step up in basis. He can sell the asset immediately and theoretically and not pay any taxes. The taxes are forgiven through the stepped up basis process. So it's a great multi-generational wealth building and preservation tool, because ultimately all those taxes that you've been deferring for decades, and I have clients that literally have been, deferring taxes for 30, 40 years, all of it is wiped away upon death through the stepped up basis. So great wealth planning tool. Let's move on to the next slide. And some of the things you can expect, and we'll go through these quickly because they're similar to other investments in that there's an offering memorandum. If we move to the next slide, you'll get a complete private placement memorandum, in addition to the property website, to drone video tours, to tax opinions, projections, all the things that you would need to make an informed decision. If we move to the next slide, there you have great communication tools. You get a closing statement just as you would if you were buying real estate directly. Next slide. They will communicate with you on a quarterly basis. And these are really important because these tie into the projections that they provide you so that you know if you're on track. And if you move to the next slide, you'll see a sample of the newsletters, and that they'll give you, summary for the quarter that you can compare to the projections. They'll let you know if they're ahead of budget, behind budget, what the variance is, what kind of improvements they're going to be making, local market conditions. They're not huge reports. 4 to 6 pages typically are more than enough on a quarterly basis. You can turn to the next slide. And then annually, if you move to the next slide after that, what you'll find are, your 1099 that you'll get. And at the end of the year, the tax reporting that you'll get is all transferred onto your Schedule E, just like you do today. For those of you who own rental properties, that's where you realize all of those pass-through benefits of real estate ownership, and the same pass-through benefits that you currently experience now with your rental properties. It's going to be similarly reported on your Schedule E, just as you have for many, many years. If you're not familiar with the Schedule E because you're new to real estate investing and you like to consider a DST as a cash investment, you're going to love that Schedule E, trust me, especially when you apply the depreciation expense or loss against that income, and you put zero taxes, or as close as you can to it. It's pretty exciting. Next slide. And we're starting to approach the end of this presentation. And what the next few slides aim to do, which we'll send to you, really aim to help you understand some of the guidelines for the DST, which are all very important and you should read. The minimums typically are 100 to 250,000. The income is paid monthly. And of course, some of these other items I've highlighted throughout the presentation. One aspect of the DST, is that you do have to be accredited, which is you have to have $1 million net worth exclusive of your primary residence, auto, and furnishing. So you have to have $1 million of investments in order to participate in the DST, which is very different than if you just went from 4 units to 8 units or 10 units. The bank, you can buy as much as the bank is willing to lend you. Unfortunately, the securities industry, it regulates the DST space. So unlike real estate, they want, for investor protection, to make sure that investors are not only qualified financially, but also sophisticated sufficiently to invest, a large sum, like a minimum of 100 to 250. Most investments in the DST space are about $500,000 to $1 million with our firm, simply because in California, homes and duplexes, fourplexes, are millions of dollars. So, and they usually end up buying, with minimums at 100 to 250. As you can see, you can diversify a portfolio even, with the sale of a single family home rental. Let's move on to the next slide. And we're going to go through these. Just go ahead and flip through these because we covered a lot of this. I have to put these in writing, but we cover a great deal of this during the presentation. Again, it's available for you to review at your leisure. And let's move on to the next one because I want to allow at least the next few minutes for questions if there are any. There are some risks that I think are important. It is an illiquid investment, and there is usually mortgages, even though DSTs can be purchased on an all-cash basis. So typically, the risk associated with a DST from a real estate standpoint, they're really no different than the real estate that you've been grown accustomed to, except that now, you are really trusting someone to do the work that you once did. And of course, they can do it. They've done it. They've proven it, except that you lose control in the process. and it is illiquid until the property is sold. So it is, an intermediate term investment or longer term investment. It's not something that you can just flip out of the next day if you wake up like you would a stock, right? So you typically buy them, but typically real estate investments are long-term investments, and these are similar, like other forms of real estate. So let's turn to the next slide. And I think we're approaching the end. We can go ahead and skip through this because I covered that. And we're not really going to go into the 1031 exchange. I think that given the amount of time that we've spent on the DST, I can say that anyone who wants to learn more about the DST and the 1031 exchange, we're available. Lawrence and his team are experts on the 1031 exchange, and they would be more than happy to walk you through the 1031 exchange aspect of it. But I was asked to keep this to an hour with some time for a Q&A, and I've gone long. So these slides, if you flip through the next few slides very quickly, Kat, what it will demonstrate is the essentials. Go ahead and flip through the next 3 or 4 slides until we get to the Q&A. And as you can see, once you receive a copy of these slides, if you just read through these, you will know 1031 pretty well. And then, of course, if you have questions, just let me know. I've been teaching Section 1031 for nearly 30 years now. And this is what you need to know. These are the essentials on a tax-deferred exchange, and they're all here for you in about 5 or 6 slides. So again, at this point, I'll thank you, for joining us, and, keep us in mind with these questions. And if you have any needs, but I think the critical next steps is, take a look at the presentation. And if it makes sense that you'd like to learn more, we'd be happy to provide you with a real estate exchange analysis. We've built great tools over the last 30 years that have helped clients make good decisions. We quantify them. Obviously, the DST is qualitative, right? It's about quality of life. You don't want to manage tenants anymore. You really want to free up time so you can pursue more interesting things in life. But we can help you quantify it, because really at the end of the day, you want to see the numbers and you want to know that you're going to be better off. And some of those tools that we'll include in the presentation will really help you get there. So that really concludes, my part of the presentation. I don't know if you guys have any questions for me, but be happy to answer any and all questions that you have.
Thank you, Michael. That's a wonderful, presentation. There's a question here. Um, yeah. It says, how liquid are investments in DSTs, and what are the exit strategies for investors?
That's a great question. Thank you. Um, well, first, the DSTs, like any business, have a number of different models, right? You can buy newly constructed apartment buildings. You can buy value add apartment buildings. Today, I happen to be presenting to you from San Antonio, Texas, where this morning we toured an apartment building that's about 10 years old. And we're going to go in, and when it was built, you brought your own washer and dryer and appliances. Today, this building is going to provide the washers and dryers. They put in smart home access. And so in this particular case, value adds are usually a little shorter term holds, because you go in there, you paint them, you improve them, you get the maximum rents that you can if the market permits, and then you sell them typically 3 to 5 years. Newly constructed properties are a little different. They have slightly longer holds. So what I'm basically getting at is that every DST has a business plan associated with it, and the holding periods on the low end are 3 to 5 years, and on the longer end, 5 to 7 years. So investors that are considering DST should consider holding it for the full duration so that they can maximize their potential value. Um, investors also that are doing 1031 exchanges, we do what's called a cash out 1031 exchange. And we recommend this to all 1031 investors in that, whenever you sell real estate, it might be a good time to take some money off the table, right? So we, through our network of tax professionals, help clients understand how they can get, you know, maybe 100, 2, 3, 400,000 of liquidity so they can diversify elsewhere. And then they can invest only the taxable portion in a DST through a 1031 exchange to help create liquidity.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And there's another question here. What are the key considerations for effective property management to enhance cash flow?
That's a great question. So enhancing cash flow takes, if you're an owner, um, and you're looking to increase cash flow, is to work with your property manager side by side to set goals. If you're doing it yourself, you really need to spend a little time understanding some of the principles that are essential in property management. And that's one, knowing your competition, knowing what your property offers relative to the nearby properties, subscribing to the local associations that give you lots of data in terms of resources so that you can reduce expenses. At the end of the day, managing a property successfully is really the result of getting the highest possible rents without incurring a lot of turnover and expense, but also reducing all the expenses possible that you can through making changes to vendors and so on. At the end of the day, so you got to find that right formula that's going to help you produce the highest net income possible. So remember, reduce expenses and increase rents and keep your rents competitive and keep your property attractive, and also attract the best tenants your property can afford, so you can reduce turnover and damage to your property.
Thank you, Michael. There's one last question here. How do DST investments perform in different economic cycles, particularly during recessions?
So yes, a great question. Just like any other asset, some are going to be defensive, some are going to be, highly sensitive to changing market conditions. So just like bonds, with rising interest rates drop substantially in value. So if you own treasury bonds and you needed liquidity, it's probably tough you probably have to take some losses in what traditionally are very safe investments because interest rates spike so much. The real estate game is a little different, and what's key about real estate is really structuring something that can let you play the long game. Real estate is the long game. If you can play the long game, most real estate investors will agree. If you can get through the tough times and you can come out on the other end, you'll come out a winner. So how do you do that? Well, leverage. Reducing leverage is really important, because that's what's going to help you withstand the test of time. All right. Lower leverage is going to also help you during periods of higher vacancies, right? So you have to consider the asset class in this process, as some assets are also prone to higher risk. For example, one of the reasons why I like multifamily, they could be obvious, but I'll tell you why we have multifamily, or we select multifamily over, for example, office or retail. With retail and office, you don't have the risk of one tenant, vacating the property. One in an office building, you can lose an entire floor if it's a floor, if it's a law firm. If you have a retail center and you have a big box tenant or a triple net tenant, you can lose that tenant. And so when you look at what's on the horizon, there are definitely going to be some types of real estate that'll be more susceptible to losses. I think multifamily assets like self-storage, great triple net tenants that have extremely high credit tenants, could be good assets to own. But no asset is risk-free. So get with a good advisor that could help you analyze the market conditions and the asset itself, And the structure is key too, because you can buy assets on an all cash basis and hold on to your real estate even if it's vacant. So that's there's a lot to that, a big answer to that question. Happy to spend more time with anyone one-on-one whenever you guys are ready.
Yes, absolutely. You can contact Michael, guys, through his contact details that will be flash, and we can forward the presentation as well. Is it okay to share the presentation, Michael?
Yes, absolutely. Please. There's some great additional information in there that with a little more time could really shed light on the value of what was discussed. But I don't think that there's any, the best way to really see value is to work with Kia to do, a performance analysis or market valuation on your property first. If you own property, put it under the microscope, see how it's doing. Um, what's your return on equity? Remember, and this is something that's often forgotten. Forget about how you did in the past. It's about how you're doing today, right? Because over the last 20, 30 years, it's been great. But if your net income is only 1 or 2% of your equity, right? Your return on equity is typically, what you'll find when you have this kind of appreciation is that your return on equity is low. And I always ask investors, if you had $1 million sitting in front of you, would you invest it at 2%? Right? And most people would say, no way, I would never do that. And so working with Kia and getting this analysis done is really going to help you understand where you are and if a change is warranted. And that's when, we will step in because we don't recommend the sale of any asset unless you can be better served. And it's through this analytical process, working with Kiop and with us, that will make sense of it for you.
Absolutely. So to wrap everything, guys, this webinar is recorded. So if you join halfway through, you can watch the replay. It will be available tomorrow or next week, as tomorrow we'll be observing Veterans Day. So thank you, Michael, and have a wonderful weekend. And
Thank
thank you
you guys
everyone
for
for joining
having me.
us.
It's been fun.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye bye.